to introduce our grand rounds and speakers today. So I know people are still coming in, but I think we can go ahead and get started. So we're really fortunate to have two of our excellent residents, one of our fourth year residents and a child psychiatry fellow providing grand rounds today, and they'll be teaching us about residents teaching residents and attendings. So it should be definitely an educational experience.
Dr. Shadid and we are here to present to you some ideas about learning theory and also to discuss how we applied it in a new program that we initiated last year with the mentorship of Dr. Cynthia Geppert. So we have nothing to disclose. We're not getting any financial remuneration for the content of this activity.
Hi, everyone. Like Wayles said, it is really good to see faces and names, even in this virtual setting. Regarding the physical setting, we do want to acknowledge that we are giving this presentation on the unceded and ancestral homelands of the Pueblo of Sandia, and acknowledge those that have lived on and fostered this land for millennia, as well as acknowledge the labor of the Indigenous faculty and students at UNM who helped craft this land acknowledgement. This presentation is being given from Pueblo land. And just as we acknowledge the geography and history of the land that we are on, we want to acknowledge that each of us, Dr. Haynes and myself, are the recipient of the labor of many caretakers and mentors, those that we've known personally, or maybe those that we've experienced through our own learning or reading. And that, we are the recipient of these caretakers and these larger cultures that we're embedded within, as well as these academic lineages. And so we're here today to share with you all some knowledge that we've gleaned. And knowledge gleaning often involves taking a point of view, a perspective, whether you're looking at a microscope or a telescope. It puts a frame around something, which is very helpful, but it also limits what you can see. You can see some things more clearly and some things just aren't in the picture at all. So all that is to say that we want to acknowledge that limitation, that framing that we're each bringing to this presentation. But we're glad to be meeting with you all today from the perspective that we currently inhabit.
Thank you, Olivia. And, the frameworks that we're coming from, as Dr. Sauer did acknowledge, that I have a background in education, arts education. You can see some fun pictures from my arts career here. And an investment in kind of youth, and I'm a mom of small kids, and Olivia's working with small kids. So we're gonna challenge you a little bit to view the experience from a place of like co-creative play. So today, we hope by the end of this presentation, you will be able to describe the affective context model of learning and the push-pull theory of learning design, that you will be able to discuss resident-led educational initiatives, including residents teaching residents, and that you will be able to demonstrate tools for active learning within Zoom.
So to create these objectives, we use Bloom's taxonomy, which is helpful as a pedagogical tool whenever anyone is creating any type of educational initiative. That Bloom's taxonomy can help us create objectives that are concrete and discrete and attainable and accessible. You want to figure out, is this thing that I created, did it do what I was hoping that it would do? So Bloom's taxonomy prompts us to think about the various levels at which our learners might be engaging with our educational content. Moving from simply, can they list it, can they remember it, can they recall it, up to can they take that information and apply it? For example, can they compare, can they critique? And then all the way up to, can they give what you provided as educational content to create something novel, a new product or a new perspective? So for our presentation today, if our intervention is successful, we're hoping you all will be able to achieve a couple level 2s in Bloom's taxonomy. So being able to describe and discuss a model of learning and a resident educational initiative. And then you'll also feel equipped to demonstrate some active learning techniques in Zoom.
And so what Olivia just modeled for you is this idea of kind of thinking about thinking or learning about learning. So we were very precise and pointed within the residents teaching residents to be talking about, like, how are we thinking about learning while we were doing it? How are we doing learning while we were thinking about it? So I welcome you here today, and I ask you to be curious and to play. Just like when my son Billy found my phone and took lots of selfies while laying on the couch, which I actually adore, here on the right side of the screen. And you're looking at these wonderful quotes to the left. we want you to really take a moment and question, what are the assumptions that we have about our current learning, how we think about learning, how we're presenting it to within our learning community, and really think about like your experience and say, am I willing to be moved? Do I think that this experience could actually create more concerns or cares so that I seek out more information and maybe change some of the ideas or things that you're doing? I also ask you to be mindful and kind of check in with yourself. Could be that you get really excited like I do, or other times when I get really resistant to new ideas, like this doesn't apply to me or my life, and just notice when those things come up because they're, a source of great information.
And to start with something a little playful is we're going to have a live interactive word cloud for the folks who are here live today. So on the next, what we want you all to think about is kind of describing learning or teaching over the last year. And one word, how might you describe that? So some of you might have done this before, and for others, this might be new, but there's a couple different ways you can contribute to this live word cloud. So if you're on desktop, it might be easier to type in pollev.com/Olivia Shadid 519. And then there's an easy place where you can answer what word describes your experience. Or you can text that number 37607 and then that phrase, Olivia Shadid 519, and then you can enter your word through there. So again, asking you to think about learning, teaching, whichever feels more interesting to you right now. But describe your experience with that over the last year. Real, complex, friendly, interactive, wild.
Wild. I like that one. Ooh, here comes some. And so you'll notice when we do the Zoom cloud, as it just changed in front of our face, the more, if you see a word that you're like, yeah, I want to add emphasis to that, that feels like very pointed in this moment, go ahead and you'll see that those things kind of get larger and more bold, change colors.
Imposter syndrome. There's a cluster of Zoom, remote, distance, invigorating, enjoyable, awkward.
Yeah, I'm noticing
constant.
a lot of feeling words, Olivia, like awkward.
Yes.
Missing, that's hitting me.
Multifaceted and constant are ones that stick out for me. I'm glad you think so, Dr. Earl. We think it's really fun and cool too. And we'll be teaching you how to do this so that you can, it's a great way, to get a pulse on your participants. What are kind of people thinking and feeling, and then also kind of aggregates the responses in a real-time, fun, visually appealing way. So great. Thank you all so much. Awesome. So as mentioned, one of our objectives that you all will feel more equipped to use some of these active learning techniques via Zoom too. So we're going to be sending out a tip sheet that has the steps on how to create and employ each of these Zoom techniques. But I also want to, as we go through, give you a little two-step summary just to plant the seed so it feels more accessible to you once you do look at the tip sheet and use this in your own presentations. So for the word cloud, I'm sure there's other ways to do it. The way that we've found easy and accessible and free is Poll Everywhere. You create an account on there. You can create your word clouds or other fun interactive quizzes, and then you use add-ins if you're creating a slide deck on PowerPoint, and you can add in the word cloud from there. So tuck that away, but like I said, we'll give you more step-by-steps with a handout that will be emailed out after this.
So that was fun. That was engaging. That maybe woke you up, or at least made you look at a different screen for a moment. And so things that we saw in the cloud, and Olivia, we should have taken a screenshot, was the affective content, the feels. We're having all the feels about education right now. And so I am too, which is part of what drove Olivia and I to creating this educational curriculum for residents. And recently I've been doing an independent study with Dr. Carey Smith, and he recommended this book to me, How People Learn, Designing Education and Training That Works to Improve Performance by Nick Shackleton-Jones. And I will tell you that I have really thoroughly been enjoying it. It is talking about two things I love to talk about: learning and feelings and learning with feelings together. So this gets me pretty enthused. It also talks a little bit about the challenges that curriculum or like designing curriculum and learning has today. Some of the discomfort it named, some of the discomfort I was feeling about the education I'd experienced in medical school and again here in residency. And it also challenges some basic assumptions that are underlying the majority of our traditional educational design. So I'm pleased to be able to talk a little bit about it with you today. You see this quote on the screen: people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel, by Maya Angelou. And so this quote really hits me. I think about it in lots of places in my life, but in my life, when I used to perform a lot on stage as a dancer or choreographer, you would do the big production, put on your makeup, do the costume, shine, you come off stage and say, what'd you think to the audience? And oftentimes they would say, well, I don't really know what it means, because it was modern dance, which was, you know, much more interpretive and abstract, but I know how it made me feel. And I feel, and then they would share something with me. And that would then bring up feelings in me, whether good or bad, complicated or simple. And so when I think about this kind of idea that feeling is the communicative method of how we're really reacting or relating to each other, it makes a lot of sense to also think about our educational design in that way. So if we start to say that, you know, how would our education design change if we thought more about connecting to learners and the things that they care about and the concerns that they have within the educational arena? So the next thing I want to tell you is that we are not computers. As much as we sometimes think we are, we just have a list of things we're going to do. We're going to crush through all of these notes. We're going to keep everything in order. That's not actually the human experience. It's some external framework that we've somehow placed on to our lives. We're not entities that process data in these discrete little bytes, terabytes, and then get put into a specific place in our CPU and can be retrieved exactly as they were stored. So if we are not computers, and it also makes sense that learning is not knowledge transfer, even though a lot of our educational system is built to transmit facts or what we consider to be knowledge. I can remember when I was a young girl in Middle Tennessee, singing a song, learning how to memorize the state capitals, or going back to medical school and watching Sketchy to memorize all of the classes of antibiotics and their likely indications, completing lots of question banks so that I can pass my board exams, or even looking at PowerPoint slides recently in residency where we've got the DSM diagnostic criteria for PTSD clearly laid out. All of this is educational offerings, but is it really learning? So when we're communicating with others, we express a number of related feelings in the form of words, and this activates corresponding feelings in the listener. This is a direct quote from the book, discussing the affective context model. So what I say is related to how I feel, and what you hear relates to how you feel. And so like, if we really think that we're trying to connect to learners in an emotional or a more humane way, then we have to really examine the education that we're creating. So let's think about learning. If you look at the slide, learning from the affective context model is proposed to be a change in behavior or capability as the result of a memory. And memory is the encoding of an affective response to an experience, which will then allow the experience to be reconstructed. So if you believe that learning is more about changing behavior and capability because of something I'm remembering, and that what I'm remembering relates to my emotional life or my concerns, well, then we have to change the way we approach education as more of an opportunity to explore and excite people instead of just providing facts that we all know we can more easily find on our handheld computers or at UpToDate. So let's take a risk. Let's evolve our ideas about learning and examine the types of learning that we're creating. So if we're not a computer, then what? If we really think about a learner's concerns, their affective context, that's going to determine what they remember and how they remember it, which then will determine if learning happens at all. So what are learners' concerns? You cannot design effective resources or experiences without understanding the people for whom you're designing them. So if you're thinking, well, how do I know what they're concerned about? There's ways to do that, which we won't get into now. Focus groups, thinking about objectives, what's set out by GME or whatever boarding set you have, and what's the reality of the clinical situation, and what's the reality of the actual people in the room and what they care about. But let's just think about two different scenarios I'll give you from my own life. When was a time when I had to do a lot of learning very fast? The night I brought my new baby home from the first time from the hospital. My goodness, so much had to be known, even though all the preparation had been done. A lot of learning was happening there because I needed to keep things alive, keep things clean, make sure I got some sleep, and developed good attachment. So think another time of like critical learning, maybe more applicable to more people on this call. I'm the solo resident at my first overnight shift on PES, and I've got a really agitated patient and 5 people telling me what I needed to do with it at the same time. So there are these moments of like critical learning, but also various concerns that come up for all of us as learners. I'm also thinking about conversations I have with patients, and we're taught to be patient-centered, to think about what their needs are, what's realistic for their life, and then guide decision-making with a shared kind of discussion with the patient. So if we're doing that with our patients daily, then why aren't we doing that with our learners? So learning design has to start with an analysis of what people care about. And when you design a learning educational experience, you need one that causes a reaction, not one that just flies under the radar. So let's think about the learning context, the affective context model of learning. It's just a theory of learning. It's not the actual model. So if you'll just go with me a little bit longer, we have the push-pull spectrum of learning design. And it basically says you need to meet a person where they are, that you need to respond to either the current concerns they already have or try to create new concerns, right? So a push experience would be something you design to address a care deficit. What do you want them to care about? What do you want them to learn about that they're not already interested in? And when you design an experience like that, it needs to be emotionally impactful. So much like in this grand rounds, I'm attempting to give you a very persuasive speech about why you should care to design more emotionally impactful experiences for your learners. And hopefully that will start to create some cares for you. And then we look at the pull, building resources, not courses. I already have the care. I want my learning and my teaching to be better. I'm willing to think about what resources I can provide for learners for things they already care about. So I'm not going to have to work as hard. I'm just going to provide resources so they can do what they need to do. So if we are to apply, and so to connect that to the grand rounds, just like Olivia was talking with Dr. Earl a moment ago, we're going to provide a PDF, and we're also providing discussion and examples of how you use multiple Zoom and video teleconference tools within an oral presentation so that you can then hopefully just go to the resource and incorporate it later. So if we think about this push-pull spectrum of design, how does it change our role? How does it change how I, as a facilitator or teacher, think about what I'm presenting? And how does it change what I, as a learner, am understanding from the things that are being given to me? Can I assess, is this a pull moment or a push moment? Are cares being developed within my learning? Or are they just providing me resources for things I already really care about? So this might, if we allow it, shift the priority of education. If we reject this idea that knowledge transfer is the foundation to one that care development and inspiration, that should be the foundation of the educational experiences that we're creating. So by no means have I told you everything you need to know about the affective context model. This is just an amuse-bouche. This is just a taste, not the full meal. If you want to know more about it, I would recommend this book here, How People Learn. You can take a screenshot of this or use your phone and take a picture. It's available at all these sites. I didn't put the links in. You can also feel free to reach out to me because, as you can tell, I love this. And I would be happy to talk and workshop with you if you had an idea that you wanted to bounce off somebody about ways to change your educational design. And just a shout out to Dr. Smart, whom I'm working with on DEI curriculum and the PGY3 class of psych residents. On Wednesday, we talked about complex conversations. And one of those ideas was going towards conflict. And so if you're feeling really conflicted about this idea, maybe I would encourage you to think this might be a place of rich growth, and we should maybe go towards it as a community. So you've heard me talk a lot. Let's take a break and think about processing this idea on our own. So how would you apply this push-pull spectrum learning design model? Warm up your fingers, write something down, or think through your head. I'm going to give us 30, 40 seconds of silence for you to just think, how would I apply this to one of my current educational experiences, either as a learner or as a facilitator? Thanks, Dr. Kreischman, for sharing that video. That's perfect. That's the kind of resource we're looking for. So I just put in the chat, you've had some time to think. If you would like to share an idea, we'd love to hear about it as a community, but don't feel pressured. It's up to you. It's your story.
And yeah, welcome to share in the chat if you like. Another way that you could share, if we weren't having this as a pre-recorded lecture, where this other option may be a better fit, is using a Zoom breakout room. So I think at this point in the pandemic, most of us have been in a Zoom breakout room at some point. But we just wanted to give you a model of how you might set this up for your learners. So one approach would be like a 2x2x2 approach. So this is where you'd have two people divided up into a room with themselves, and they're given each 2 minutes to share what they were reflecting on. And you would want to note that if a person's partner didn't show up, maybe they'd stepped away from their computer for a moment, they could return to the main room to reflect with the facilitators or to be reassigned to a new breakout room. And on the next slide, we wanted to give you a sense of what it is to create breakout rooms. They're fairly straightforward. If you were the host of a Zoom meeting, there's a little green icon called breakout rooms. You just click it and you have some options for customizing. For example, you could say that people can choose their room randomly. You could say, we're gonna put Dr. Andrade and Dr. Lunroot in a room together. You could open up the rooms as different themes and let folks choose which room they're going to go to. A couple other really nice things to note. So one, you can broadcast instructions to the rooms. So we've all probably been in rooms where you were given an instruction and then you go to the rooms and you're like, wait, what are we supposed to do? You can actually broadcast instructions to each room, which is great. And then you as the facilitator can bop around rooms as well. You can pop in, hear some things that are going on, get a pulse, provide prompts and feedback, and then bop into other rooms as well. So this mirrors, a teacher in a classroom who's circulating amongst small groups, hearing what's going on and helping stimulate the conversation and push it forward. So breakout rooms can be really helpful, and you can set the time too. So that can be helpful to kind of put the pressure on that folks only have so much time to synthesize their thoughts and share before returning to the main room.
Wayles, you're muted.
Still muted.
I'm so sorry. So
Zoom
what I was excitedly gesticulating about was the fact that I was introducing the new education chiefs to talk to us a little bit about the work that other learners are doing within the community. So I'm going to throw it to them now.
Thanks, Dr. Haynes. So I just wanted to briefly introduce myself. My name is Angelica. I'm a third-year resident. And myself and Dr. Aurora are the two education chiefs for the year. So we're really excited to continue an education work group that Dr. Aurora will tell you a little bit more about, and then hopefully be helpful in providing feedback about all of these didactic sessions that all of our attendings have worked so hard on. So I'll hand it over to Dr. Aurora now.
Hi everyone, I'm Anmol and I am one of the other PGY3s, and I'm grateful for this opportunity to be able to share our didactic work group information with you guys. The didactic work group meets every 6 weeks or so on Wednesday evenings to discuss concerns or ideas for educational goals across each PGY class. If anyone is interested to join, please email myself or Dr. Romero, and we will put our emails in the chat shortly. Some of our projects over the past year include feedback to faculty after each didactic session and annually to the program regarding the didactic series, face sheets for orientation to rotation for all PGY classes, online education material repository for easy accessibility to learning materials in one place, in addition to introduction of the diversity, equity, and inclusion curriculum in collaboration with Dr. Smart. I will now let another member of our team, Dr. Andrade, talk more about one of his projects, the Pride curriculum.
Thank you, Dr. Aurora. I'm David Andrade, and I'm a second-year resident here to talk a little bit about the Pride project. So this is a resident-led longitudinal project focused on reviewing high-yield concepts in a brief and efficient manner. The project involves pairing Pride questions with similar topics and creating capsule-sized didactics that will be taught on didactic dates. The project aim is to have a threefold benefit on the didactic creator, both pairing, creating, and teaching, and also a twofold on the receiver, learning and later repeat and review. Currently, the project is being trialed on PGY2 didactics and actually recruiting PGY3s and PGY1s. And that's about it with the project. I'll go back to Dr. Haynes. Thank you.
Thanks, family. Thank you for being here and adding your voice to this important conversation.
Now, we just heard from our residents about some of their initiatives and energy from the didactic work group, from people's experiences wanting to improve education. And a lot of energy typically can stem from emotional experiences, as we discussed with the affective context model of learning. So the emotions, of course, can be positive, they can be difficult and complex. Here's a word cloud, similar to one we did when we started our presentation, that was done during our very first session of an initiative that we taught this last spring called Residents Teaching Residents. You can see a mix, just like we saw when we all chimed in with how we felt about learning and teaching over the last year. This was learning in particular for our residents, what it felt like for them. And it was out of this mix of feelings, which Dr. Haynes and I also shared, that we co-created this course, Residents Teaching Residents.
So we worked on this course. Olivia, Dr. Shadid and I created it together under the mentorship of Dr. Cynthia Geppert. It was implemented in the winter of 2022. We presented it to the PGY1 and PGY2 psychiatry resident class at that time. And it was a 5-class series held during the Wednesday didactics, and it took place exclusively within the virtual learning environment. So what motivated us? What were our concerns? Or what did we perceive to be the cares of our learners? So jumping back, before I came into my second career as a physician, I was a dance artist educator, and I taught I would teach like 8 to 12 hours a day, depending on how many classes I could get as an independent artist. And so I spent a lot of time in the classroom doing a lot of active learning because I was teaching dance. I was teaching people how to move, but I also taught students how to teach. And when I came to residency, it was kind of surprising to me that we had all this teaching work to do as residents, but very little instruction about how to find the resources or how to really dig into them, or like what we were experiencing as a community, having to be both learners and teachers at the same time. So that was one of the things that drove Dr. Shadid and I to create this course. And then we also realized that because of the pandemic and the policies that we were going to be presenting it exclusively in the virtual environment. So that really led us to think, if we're going to be on the screens, we don't just want to sit there looking at black boxes. We want people to be engaged. We want them to be kind of wrestling or grappling with the material and being able to find that community element. So how are we going to do that? And that's what took us to incorporating all of these Zoom techniques that we're working on sharing with you today. This project will be presented at the Association of Academic Psychiatry's annual conference in September. So what did we hope that the program was going to get from this? We were thinking that in this near peer learning experience, it would introduce more elements of academic kind of scholarship and consideration to this process of teaching within the graduate medical learning environment. That it would help foster the development of scholarly inquiry and expand mentorship practices, especially near peer mentorship within our psychiatry residency. And the idea really was to address the gaps. We're not talking about large picture curriculum design here, but just as we discussed, trying to find the concerns of learners. We're looking for like, what is missing? What else could be added to the program, and how can we provide a vehicle for that? And so what were we hoping that the residents would get? We've talked about this a little bit, but we would hope that they would reflect on their learning experiences, that they would have an opportunity and community to kind of examine the didactic and clinical learning through a lens of multiple learning styles and theories. Different foundational ideas were presented, and that they would really get the opportunity to acquire new skills or revisit old skills in active learning, feedback, presentation, delivery, and design. As far as like the larger picture, it's conceived to be a progressive multi-year curriculum with these group educational experiences during the Wednesday didactics, and then targeted resources for the year-specific content for further kind of exploration and learning, and a near-peer mentorship model where right now I'm working to pull in PGY2 and PGY3 residents to help continue this process. So let's apply push-pull spectrum learning design model to RTR. So right, first we have the push. How am I designing learning experiences to address a care deficit? So maybe some residents who got there, and they might be on the call now, were like, I don't really want to learn more about teaching. It's the least favorite part of my job. I just kind of gloss over it, or I feel so anxious or concerned about it. It just makes me really resistant to it. Or maybe people came in and they had lots of cares, but still the idea was, how can we have experiences through these 5 virtual sessions that would draw out personal story and reflection, and provide skills or exposure to different types of skills to get people excited to say there's more out there that can support you. And then we also had the pull. We built resources. So we provided to people that already had the cares that were motivated links to documents at the Office of Continuous Learning, their blog, sites where they had different modules on learning feedback with good judgment, other clinically relevant learning techniques, and different Moodles that were already designed and in place to support education within the clinical environment.
As with any educational intervention, it's helpful to assess, again, did it do what it was supposed to do? And there's many ways of doing this. We used a couple different ways when it came to RTR, including pre and post surveys. So to collect some more quantitative data. So you can see here, we looked at a lot of different things at a lot of different levels of Bloom's taxonomy. Everything from, I can provide effective and meaningful feedback. I can apply active learning techniques in the clinical teaching. I'm ready to incorporate teaching in my clinical work. I'm comfortable in the role of a teacher. So a lot of those are more applying or higher up on Bloom's taxonomy. And then a couple, I can describe elements of effective feedback. I can describe elements of basic learning theory. And I can compare basic tenets of andragogy, pedagogy, and pedagogy. So the focus of our presentation today isn't necessarily all the ins and outs of RTR, but we do want to offer it up as an example of the work that residents are doing within the department, and also as a model of ways to create intentional educational experiences. But here's a little glimpse at some of those results. So to give you a sense on some of the more lower on Bloom's taxonomy, more knowledge that was aim to be transferred and encoded. We asked residents at the beginning, at the end, how comfortable they felt comparing basic tenets of andragogy, pedagogy, and foodagogy. And we used a 5-point Likert scale: strongly disagree, disagree, neutral, agree, strongly agree. You can see residents did not strongly agree or agree with those statements before RTR, and after 63% strongly agreed or agreed. When it came to some of the skills, for example, feeling ready to incorporate teaching into clinical work, a lot of our residents at baseline felt ready to incorporate teaching, which was great to see. And after RTR, a stronger number, 89%, strongly agreed or agreed with that statement for themselves. And so, of course, quantitative data is helpful for putting things in tidy boxes and can be really revealing of patterns, but not everything fits into a box. So one way of breaking out of that box that we used to collect feedback and data was a whiteboard on Zoom. So here it is. Here's a screenshot that was from RTR itself. And the whiteboard, I like this representation of data, of course, because it's participant generated, it's fun, allows a lot of creativity. You can see at the top, there's a menu. And so folks could choose whether they wanted to type their response, draw their response, stamp their response. And so just to bring your attention to a couple different areas. So on the left, there's this one that has a bunch of heart stamps around it. Scenarios to practice skills in breakout rooms might have made the practices more fruitful. So what they're getting at is we divided folks into breakout rooms a few different times and asked them to practice skills, but did not provide scenarios for them to practice within. And so instead of spending cognitive bandwidth on practicing the skill, they were like, oh, well, what's the scenario where we might use this? So I thought that was really effective, useful feedback. And you can see other folks agreed because they could provide little hearts around it. And of course, this mimics how many folks are used to engaging with content via social media. And then just another area, as another example, a little further over on the right, great skills for how to be intentional with teaching. There seemed to be some expressed agreement with stars and hearts and a drawn smiley face and a check mark. So a very fun way to capture a diversity of experiences and narratives that might not have fit within the discrete pre and post survey questions that we provided.
The other qualitative method we used was a Google Doc with a link so that people could write in more longer descriptive just things that they wanted to tell us about their experience or ways that it could be modified.
And to create a whiteboard is pretty simple. If you were the Zoom host, you could just hit share screen, and whiteboard is actually one of the screens you would click and share. Until I saw this demonstrated at the APA a year or two ago, I'd shared screen before, but I never noticed, oh, that whiteboard. And there's different options. So if you just wanted to draw something or demonstrate something on the whiteboard, you can, or you can open it up to all participants to contribute. You also can choose to make it anonymous or not anonymous. So you have options there. That's how to whiteboard. Muted.
I'm muted. So what's next for residents teaching residents? As I said before, we are thinking about it as a progressive 4-year course and developing the curriculum across the arc of the residency. First year, which last year's PGY1s and current PGY3s received, was foundational knowledge and concrete skills and feedback and active learning and basic learning theory. Hopefully this year, we've been approved to go ahead and design and implement a series on effective multimedia presentations. And then in the future, we're hoping to continue to develop presentation skills, a course on presentation skills, and then also maybe work into a capstone project during 4th year where you create some educational product with a mentor in your specific area of interest. So closing the circle. We would like, we've talked the whole time about to assess how we did today, what you thought, how it learned. So if you would go with us for a little bit, I have a very short poll for us, which I will be launching. So if you wouldn't mind, there's a poll on your screen. And really what we're doing is assessing how your experience or knowledge about the objectives. Before the presentation, I was confident I could describe the affective context model of learning and the push-pull spectrum of learning design. And then now, after this presentation, I'm confident I can describe the effective context model of learning and push-pull spectrum of learning design. So what was your experience before? What was your experience after? I'll give you a moment to answer.
And something that's fun, I'm running the poll right now. I'm just so you know, you can see on the back end what percentage of folks have responded. So it's good to get a sense if everybody responds right away. You don't need to keep it open any longer. You can also encourage people to keep responding if you'd like to see a higher response rate. So just a little idea of what it looks like to use polls. So I see that we have 57% of folks have participated. A few more are still rolling in, 58%. And then what's fun as well, as you're about to see, is that you can share the results. And just like Dr. Cuellar said in the Zoom chat, it can be a nice way to get de-identified information about how people are thinking and feeling, and also kind of normalize, like, oh, I might be feeling this, or other people feeling this way, and you can see kind of where you are in that spread. So I'm going to end the poll. We have 64% participated, and share the results.
So if we look at the results together, we can just notice that there was movement, right? Before, as a group, we were not aware. 64% of the people, of respondents, were not aware of this. And then afterwards, over the majority of people who responded said that they had been. So we're going to stop sharing and go to our next poll question. Same format as before. Before the presentation, I was confident I could discuss resident-led education initiatives, including residents teaching residents. And the second question, now after the presentation, I'm confident I can discuss resident-led educational initiatives, including residents teaching residents.
Just as a note with the last question, it looks like three people were familiar with the affective context model. So that's fun to hear and think about, and hope that you can, when you teach with that model in mind, it would be fun to maybe name it as such, and help your learners also kind of see what that looks like in action.
So we'll give you guys a couple more seconds to respond before we end the poll. Okay. So similar spread as what we saw last time. Some people were aware of it beforehand, but most not. And now we know more about it. Last poll question. Before this presentation, I was confident I could demonstrate tools for active learning with Zoom. Second question. Now, after this presentation, I'm confident I can demonstrate tools for active learning with Zoom. And so as you guys think through that, just to say, when you're designing an educational module, it's important to get assessment and feedback, as Dr. Shadid and I have been talking about, because that's how you refine. When you're designing a research project or first figuring out how to talk to patients or do therapy, it doesn't stay the same from the beginning to the end. You continue to do iterations and revisions. And if you do this, if you suss out how your learners are experiencing it and what they're actually getting, then you can start to modify and refine your educational products as well. All right, last chance to answer. So this one was a little bit more, people felt a little bit more confident if you just, I'm not like doing statistics, but looking at the bar graph versus the other two things that we were trying to figure out or assess. Thank you, everyone. I know polls are not always fun, sometimes fun, but I appreciate you responding because that really helps Dr. Shadid and I as we continue to refine the work.
And so probably some of you have created polls before, but this one is also fairly straightforward. On the Zoom website, under your meeting, you have an option for polls and quizzes. And as you saw, you could have multiple questions on one pop-up, like we just did, a before and after. You could have one question per pop-up. You also can have it so folks can select multiple answers or restrict it to only one answer. You have options there. And then if you're the host, you just can launch it from the bottom Zoom bar. It says polls.
So I guess my question to you is, do you want change? Have you been persuaded to examine what you're doing and think about ways that it could grow, evolve, be better? So this is a tool that the fabulous Dr. Shadid has created to support all of these techniques that we showed you today. And Lily will be sending it out to the group so that you can access it as you need. And we just really want to thank everyone for coming and being here today and participating with us. As you can tell, it's something we feel passionately about. And I think the more we can talk about it in a community, the stronger we can become. Thank you.
Great work. Thank you so much, Dr. Haynes. Thank you, Dr. Shadid, for your inspiration and just the energy and very dynamic presentation, and for our other residents, educational chiefs, and joining too. If anyone has questions or other feedback, happy to open it up further at this point. We've had a few chat messages. Thanks, Dr. Delmore, for also highlighting some of the learning theory and kind of ways we study these shifts educationally. Yeah, I want to thank you both very much for giving us some great food for thought on how we can improve our teaching in the hybrid world, where we're still doing some virtual and some in person as well, and just really thinking about how to be the most engaging educators that we can.